do what Dorina did as well. Thank you, everyone, and thanks for coming along. So Dorina has given you a great international perspective. There's sort of safe cycling. Cities around the world are moving with something of a cycling revolution. But we keep hearing a bit that couldn't possibly happen here in Brisbane. And I'm here to tell you that it really could. And I think you're probably here because you realise that it is possible to change and that it's quite exciting. But we do keep hearing from council that it's all a bit too hard, and we hear excuses like we have narrow streets in Brisbane and sort of strange things like that. So I'm here to show you some examples that will hopefully disprove that. And here's a protected bike lane that I built earlier. To talk about parking for a moment, I do want to show you this video because it's kind of mesmerising. So hopefully it's going to play. Yeah, so look, this is somewhere in the States, and it's just an awesome video because these were some people that decided that school drop-off was a bit hard, so they wanted a better solution to school drop-off. So you probably hear people all around Brisbane say, we need more parking at school, or school drop-off zone's a problem. And if you actually follow that to its logical conclusion, you actually end up with something potentially that looks a bit like this. And it's fantastic. It's really well organised. And in the drone shot in a moment, they'll actually show you down the road, and the road's banking up. So I'm quite sure that there's people there that are saying, hey, we need more parking and more room at school drop-off. So I guess I'm trying to say that I'm sure there's no one in here that looks at that and goes, wow, I wish we had that, like in our suburb. It's fairly inner Brisbane here. I'm really sure that no one, oh, there you go, they haven't solved the street problem. So if you're basically saying everyone needs to be able to go everywhere in the car whenever they want and to be able to get close to their destination, ultimately, you need something like that. And then when you have something like that, it's not enough, and then you need more of it and more of it and more of it. So no one wants their suburb to look like that. Well, maybe they do, but I'm sure no one here does, because it's just silly. No one could possibly think that's a good idea. You've got to watch this. It's amazing. It's out there on YouTube, and I'm just, fascinated by it. It goes on. We're only halfway through. So what's the alternative? And I'm saying to you that the alternative might look something like that. And I guess I'm saying, well, what community would you like to live in? Would you like to live in the community that says, hey, we need more, school drop-off, we need more cars, we need that first situation? Or do you want to live in a community, because you actually already do, and you're very lucky like that, you want to live in a community that looks more like this? It looks like this. This is how kids get to school. This is a community that is friendly, that has smiles, that has happiness, that has people out there sort of every morning looking happy. This is right here in West End, and hopefully there's a few people here that were at our protected bike lane a while ago. So, this is the alternative, the antidote to that silliness. So I can't really show you any particularly good examples from Brisbane yet, because we don't have good examples of protected bike lanes. And as I said, our council is keen on this idea that our streets are too narrow and that's all a bit hard. So I've gone south, I've gone to Sydney, right, and here's some pictures that I'm going to show you from Sydney. And I can guarantee you that roads in Sydney are not any wider than they are in Brisbane. So when they tell you that we can't do this because somehow we've got these mysteriously narrow lanes, those people have never been anywhere else. They haven't even been to Sydney. So you can do protected infrastructure in big cities. Sydney is bigger than Brisbane. They can do this through some of their inner suburbs. Now, one of the fantastic things about Google... Oh, sorry, I've gone back because I saw this picture online and I tried to look up where it was. So I've gone onto Google Earth to find it. And that's not a great shot of it, but you can go into Google Earth and have a look at that. It's George Street in Sydney, in Redfern, in fact. And not too well there, but you can see there is actually a two-way protected bike lane along there. Now, the great thing about Google Earth is you can go back in time. So you can go back in 2009 and have a look at what that street looked like. And that could be any street in Brisbane that council will tell you that you can't put a protected bike lane there. And I go, well, go to George Street in Sydney and have a look, because you can. Looking the other way down the street, this is what it looked like in 2009. a street, not that much room, some parking on either side, and they put a protected bike lane down that street. And the engineering exists. This stuff can be done. There's nothing magically narrow or impossible about Brisbane streets. This is a really interesting view a bit down the road, because this is what a particular intersection there looked like, the intersection of George Street and Wellington Street in Waterloo. And that's what it looks like now. And to me, as a cyclist, riding through that roundabout is just not a particularly fun experience. And as a pedestrian, it's not a particularly fun experience too, because people tend to come around roundabouts fairly quickly, and it's actually, you have to make a bit of a scramble across the road, which is fine, if you're fit and mobile, but if you're a little bit elderly, if you've got young kids, you might not have time to get across there. But suddenly that looks like a pedestrian crossing that it is comfortable to push a pram across, it's comfortable to get across in a wheelchair, it's a bikeway that's comfortable to ride along. So a little further down the road, this is an area that was a high pedestrian area back in 2009. We are here on Google Earth. But they actually managed to make it better. Again, they put a protected bike lane, they narrowed the traffic lane. There's still as much parking as there was, and I'm sure as many trouble parking as there always was in this place. The pedestrian crossing is actually on the road. So suddenly it's just a much more pleasant place to be. Here's a fairly big intersection with a faded zebra crossing that I'm sure people ignored, like people tend to ignore zebra crossings here in Brisbane. And that's what it looks like now. And suddenly this is just a place that feels safe, that you could ride with your kids to school. So again, a little bit further down the road, and it's great to be actually drop into Google Street View and have a look around in the panorama and go down the street and have a look at the treatment at intersections and all down these streets. And that's what it previously looked like. I think that's back in 2007. George Street's not the only example. Burke Street in Sydney has some fantastic examples as well, but Google Street View doesn't go back far enough for me there. Of course, it's not just Sydney that's managed to do it. Adelaide, this is Regent Street North, which is actually the extension of Frome Street. This is sort of a residential part of the inner Adelaide, I guess. And they've managed to put a protected bike way along here, and it functions quite well. And again, previously it was sort of this wide street, there was parking on both sides, but there's still parking there. There's still as much parking as you would need on this street, bearing in mind that, when I talked about having as much parking as you ever wanted everywhere, you're back to that situation with the school drop-off kind of thing. This picture, and I didn't manage to get there on a Thursday morning, but I spoke to the council people in Adelaide, and they said, well, how are they going to deal with the bin drop-off? And I actually thought this was a really interesting idea, because they've actually put a couple of parking spots, like each fifth spot or something. On Thursday mornings, you're not allowed to park there. So what happens is on Wednesday night, you don't park in that spot, you put your wheelie bins out and they come and get collected, and the rest of the time there's parking. So, they've managed to find solutions. And I haven't shown pictures of bus stops here, but there's engineering solutions that address bus stops, and there's engineering solutions that address intersections. What's missing is the political will to actually do this, to say, hey, we want the kind of community that looks like this. And so I think that if you want to have something that's not just about parking and having our streets filled up with cars, be they parked cars or slowly moving cars, then you have to think about, what are we prepared to do that? And it's not about sacrifice, it's about coming together as a community and saying we want to have streets that feel livable, that feel comfortable, that don't have the kind of experience that I just had this afternoon on my way here when I rode down Vulture Street, and it was terrifying. It's a horrible, horrible street. And there's a few others that you can probably think of in our area that really aren't friendly places to ride, and they don't feel like this. This is the kind of thing you can have young people, old people can get out on the street and feel comfortable to ride around. Now, one thing that we should mention is you do sort of need some kind of networked grid of bike lanes. And this idea that you might just put a bike lane for one block on one street is not a particularly useful way of getting lots of people to ride. Because you know what, to get there, you're going to have some kind of scary experience. But state government and council have actually agreed a principal cycle network plan. So they've gone the whole of Brisbane, and there is an agreed plan that says these streets, these routes, if we made these bicycle friendly, then this would be a good bike network. You would be able to get places. So the ride that I did this afternoon, I came in from Morningside and I rode down Stanley Street, and then that turned into Vulture Street from Norman Park. And I can tell you it's horrible. I really don't recommend it. But that street is in the Principal Cycle Network plan, and I would tell you that Vulture Street doesn't look very different to some of those streets in Sydney that I showed you, back in 2009. You could easily have protected space down Vulture Street. It opens up this sort of whole West End peninsula, if you like. We really need to start thinking about how it would feasibly work so that you didn't have to be a little bit crazy to ride your bike here. Sorry, I should have actually said a tiny bit about space for cycling when I started, but you have seen us around. Here we are making our protected bike lane. So we got together before the 2016 council election because we were just getting frustrated that council didn't seem to be listening. They didn't seem to be taking on board new ideas. I've spent a year going along to council meetings and listening in on them and talking to councillors. And I would say that there are some individual councillors around Brisbane who kind of get the idea that more cars everywhere is not the solution, but we're not seeing a lot of action, and it's very frustrating. So I think we're very lucky to have Jonathan in the Gabba ward, and we have a real opportunity here in this area to actually think about what our community should look like, what our streets should look like, and how it could just feel better and safer and more comfortable for everyone.
Thanks, Belinda.